All right. Hi, folks, to anybody who is watching the recording later, and obviously to anybody that is live. This is our second one of these. If I think I've got a couple of insert breaks in here for questions, if anybody wants to ask questions, but we do, as I understand it, through Zoom have the like Q&A thing, and Lindsay will keep an eye on that. So I'll get started here. Speaking of Lindsay, thanks to her for organizing this. So she, in general, is organizing this as a campaign. So queuing up the polls about what we should cover, planning these and administering Zoom and doing a lot of things that I am grateful that I'm not also doing. So that's cool. I appreciate the administration here and handling the collateral and assets and such. So thank you for organizing. Um, so this is a presentation about the idea of mapping CTAs onto content, and in particular about getting as much value as you can out of largely existing content that you have. But before I get into the idea of a CTA, I kind of want to philosophically talk about this idea of a productive site visit, because this is something I think about a lot. And at the highest level, like setting aside things like, funnels and conversion rates and mailing lists and all that, like what are we really doing here with a website? So I would say that a productive site visit, somebody being on your site, it's productive if it moves them towards a purchase. Obviously, that's the goal. But I would also argue that it is productive in some cases if it moves them away from a purchase. Now, if you're in marketing, that might sound insane, but hear me out. If you think of the business holistically, what you really don't want to do is have your website miscommunicating your value proposition and you're bringing in, users or customers that are not a good fit for your offering. That is going to take up an outsized amount of customer support time. It's going to result in unhappy customers. So it's far better if, while somebody is being educated about the nature of your offering, they are moving towards you if it is appropriate and moving away from you if not. And I would consider either pieces of education along those lines and the subsequent actions to be productive. I would also say that generally speaking, if the site visit generates or at least sustains and especially increases mind share about your brand in a good way, that's a productive site visit. So they get onto your site for the first time, that's going to generate some brand awareness. That's good. If they get onto your site a second time and they're associating your brand with a helpful tutorial, that is good. So the more that they're cementing or you are being cemented in their minds, that is a good thing. Caveat this with in a good way. You don't want them to come away thinking like this is ridiculous or what a terrible site experience. So it has to be a positive experience. And then finally, uh, I would say that a productive site visit is one that provides value to the visitor. So even if it doesn't really do anything for you as a brand per se, I still think that this can be valuable. There is value extracted from this transaction if you entertain or educate the site visitor. And if you think about what content marketing is, this is something I've talked about a lot over the years. I think of it as you create content that has enough value that you could theoretically sell it, but you give it away in exchange for building trust in your audience. And so, because of that, the content marketing is designed to sometimes entertain and often educate. So, if it is doing that, you are putting good out into the world. Now, it probably is going to tie in with positive brand awareness, but I think it's important because it's easy to get pretty cynical when really deep in the weeds of like conversion rates and stuff. But if somebody shows up to your site and they get something out of it, I personally consider that to be a good thing. So if we think about this in more pragmatic terms, like what do we really mean by this? So a productive site visit might result in a purchase or a trial, like some obvious commercial action, book a sales call, that type of thing. That is a pretty common flavor of something that most, if not everybody, would consider productive. Another thing that might be there is de-anonymization. So this is the purpose of a lot of like form fills and lead magnets and stuff. You're getting people onto your site. You hypothesize that they're qualified to be a customer, but you don't know who they are. If they fill out a form or a hand raise in some fashion, you have the chance to understand who they are and then potentially to reach out to them. I think a lot of people would generally consider that to be quite productive. And then personally, the main litmus test that I might have for a productive visit in terms of measurables would be, does this visit give me a chance to reach this person again? And that's a little bit broader than anything I've talked about here so far. But if they get onto your site, Do you have them sign up for a mailing list, or do you maybe just pixel them so you can retarget? Have you constructed or contrived of some fashion that you will be able to speak to them again, sign up for my YouTube channel, that type of thing? Because that's really the linchpin for anything you're going to do with that person in the future. You need to be able to speak to them again. So I consider it to be a productive site visit if you're securing your next at bat in your relationship with that visitor. Now, what can happen here is a fair bit of ocean boiling. So if you listen to people in a marketing group or what have you, start to talk about like calls to action and what do we want visitors to do? Do we want them to share on social media? So you have the little panel of things at the bottom of a blog post or whatever. You want them to leave a comment? Sure. Do you want them to bookmark the site? Yeah, I mean, I imagine that would be great. Download a white paper. That sounds good. Follow on YouTube. Sure, why not? Navigate to a solution brief. Like that's a real good one, especially if you're selling into the enterprise. You want them to do a trial? Yeah, of course. So I've got this down here at the bottom is like how you're going to be answering that. And so your head is going to start to explode as you consider the possibilities. And so to celebrate that, I found the most terrifying graphic of the marketing funnel that I could in terms of boiling the ocean, and it's there for your review. So with that in mind, let's regroup a little bit and think of this as maybe if we just look at an individual URL think of it as a post or what have you, it gets a lot easier. So instead of like, what do we want people to do on our website? What do we want people to do on this particular blog post or on this particular page? And for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to encourage that type of thinking. Let's start with a specific concrete location, a specific concrete instance, and think from there. And then we can assemble that into broader patterns and strategy. So now, in terms of talking about calls to action, I imagine the vast majority of people consuming this are going to understand pretty well what I mean by that. But I do, for the sake of definition and completeness here, want to establish a definition, a working definition. So what are we talking about exactly? And quite simply, you're asking the person, the visitor, to do something, and specifically calling them to take some kind of action. And that might be sign up for the mailing list, book a demo, et cetera. It might be this guy on YouTube with a actually fairly weak call to action of smash the like button. Um, so it can take a lot of forms, but the one thing they're going to share is that they're clear about what it is that you're suggesting that the person do. So the question you might then ask is why do that? And the reason is just from an efficacy perspective, it's going to be a lot more effective if you suggest something specific as an action than if you just hope for the best. So if you write blog post A on your website and it just exists, and your hope is that people will think this is such a good blog post, I ought to look up who did this and then start researching them and figure out how to use their product, like that's pretty unlikely. If, on the other hand, you have a call to action that says, hey, if you liked this post and it helped you, we actually do this for a living. Give us a call. That's a much better call to action because it is a call to action. You're suggesting what they should do. Now, for a call to action, I'm going to define these four components and talk about them in the rest of the presentation here. Location is just where you place this. So I'm going to probably use this a lot interchangeably with URLs because I'm mainly talking about people's sites. The context is very related to the location, but basically this is about the visitor. Like, what are they doing or what are they thinking about when they experience or encounter the call to action? The wording of the call to action, this maybe wasn't the best phrase I picked. I would include, sure, the wording, like what you're inviting them to do, but also the graphic experience of the call to action. So let's call it the user experience of the call to action. And then finally, there's the offer. So there is the, thing itself that you're suggesting that they do, or there's the suggestion itself on the page. The offer or asset is the thing you want them to do. So it's get on the mailing list for tips or, read the solution brief. It's that thing. Um, Thinking about what makes a call to action effective, just to define some heuristics here, it tends to be effective when when the action or offer um, are clear from the wording of the call to action. So it's obvious what you're inviting me to do if I'm on your site. And on top of that, the wording should communicate the value proposition. So here's what I want you to do, and here's why. And more importantly, here's why you should do it. Here's what's in it for you. So if you're on that tutorial blog post, uh, sign up for our mailing list because we'll give you more tips like this. Now it's clear to me why I would take this action. The wording and offer should be appropriate for the visitor. So, just as a random dumb example, if you are catering to people in the C-suite in a sort of like stodgy profession, like legal or bureaucratic or compliance, that's probably not the moment to be throwing in Gen Z slang terms. So you want to like connect with your audience reasonably well in the wording and presentation. You also want the wording and the offer itself to be appropriate. So it isn't like, hey, read this blog post that is supposed to entertain you anyway. Do you want to buy 7 figures worth of consulting? So the two things should make sense together. And finally, you want the location to get regular eyeballs, meaning a call to action isn't going to be effective if nobody sees it to take it. So ineffective calls to action that I tend to see, unclear or generic wording. So, just something simple, like if you want them to sign up for the mailing list and you have a call to action and the button says something like submit, mm, you know, sign up, try to tune the wording so that generic and unclear wording can really kind of like degrade the likelihood of uptake. The other thing you'll see a lot is ignorable calls to action. And what I mean by that is a call to action that blends in maybe too much with the surrounding text, or it's in a location like at the top or in the side gutter that people have ad blindness around and are just used to ignoring. So, and I have this on like my old consulting site, Dead Tech. There's something in the side gutter that says sign up for the mailing list. I can tell you from the data over the years that doesn't get a lot of uptake because people just, they're not over there. They're not looking at that. Inappropriate for the location or context. So this is just the inverse of what I was talking about before. But if you're, not connecting in a meaningful way with the visitor because it's not appropriate, they're not going to take it. And the weak value proposition is a big one. So the most common one that I see is the one I just talked about on my site. Well, no, I think I offer something, but like you see something on a site that's like, you should sign up for a newsletter and that's it. Why on earth would I do that? Don't I get enough email? So you want there to be a value proposition there, or it's unlikely people are going to pursue it. Um, so with a CTA on a page, how do you measure its efficacy? And I actually personally think that this is a pretty easy question to answer. Generally, there's going to be some number of people that see it, and then some subset of those people are going to actually engage the call to action, and that's going to be your conversion rate on that call to action. So basically, you want to measure that, you want to establish a conversion rate, and then it's going to be effective if the conversion rate is better than, say, the norm for that situation, or the conversion rate is better than your hypothesis and expectations. So you just instrument it, gather enough data, and as I say here, voila, you're able to reason about the effectiveness. And if it's effective, then great, double down on it, bring more traffic to it. If it's ineffective, then maybe you tweak it or try different things, or you just abandon it and do something else. So the difficulty here isn't so much in the measurement piece of this or reasoning about whether a call to action is effective. I mean, more is better. The harder part is in forming that CTA hypothesis in the first place. So up here, I'm saying we thought 1% of people would engage in the CTA, but in reality, it's 1.1. Great, we were successful. Why 1%? That's the harder question. So generally, if you're taking a stab at what a CTA should do or what you want it to do, you're going to want to make a hypothesis about it, and you're going to want to either ground this in return on investment or ground it in some kind of broader funnel goal that you've established or that somebody has established for you. So here's what I mean by this. If we want to talk about the broader funnel goal, let's say somebody comes to you and says that we need to generate 100 incremental qualified leads per month. What you can do is go and look at your site's traffic and think about how much traffic you're getting and what you would need to achieve from a call to action perspective to get those people to a de-anonymizing type of lead like a form fill or a lead magnet like a form fill. And then say, well, okay, if we instrument calls to action on pages that have, and that I have here, 2,000 visits per month, and we convert at 1%, we'll get 20 extra qualified leads. So if we do that 5 times, we're up to our 100. So that's one way to ground the experiment in something tangible is that you just work backwards from funnel goals. The other would be an ROI argument. So let's say that you have an article targeting the term DevOps, which is highly competitive, and you're going to try to compete with Atlassian and whoever all is ranking for that term. And your hypothesis is that if you spend $1,000 on that, that you're going to rank and drive a bunch of traffic, and that traffic is going to result in enough of improvement in your conversions across the board that it will more than make up for that $1,000 in 2 months. That's a solid hypothesis. And when I say that you would need to have a dollar value that you're placing on a qualified lead. So that's the kind of thinking. I don't want to get too far into these weeds, but the difficult part is coming up with what you should be expecting. The relatively easy part is measuring it. So at this point, any questions? Did anybody submit anything? Or I think people can, I don't know.
I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A box, so we're good for right now.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't ignoring people. Okay, so planning, what you're going to actually do here. We've kind of established the way all of this works and the ground rules, so to speak. So like, what do you actually do if you want to get the most out of the content and the traffic that you have? So broadly speaking, here is the plan. What you want to do, what I would suggest doing is first and foremost, itemize location and context. And what I mean by this is essentially you're going to get a list of URLs on your site. And I would recommend prioritizing these by like the amount of traffic they're receiving or, and that's what I mean by impressions. So impressions of the proposed CTAs, or potentially by the hypothesized value, meaning I have this article, it doesn't get a ton of traffic, but I really think this would convert if we put a CTA on it. So it would more than make up for the relatively low traffic. So in some fashion, you're going to identify URLs on your site, locations, and then you're going to prioritize them to work through in terms of what you're going to instrument there. And that's broad strokes. Once you have that list in place on a per URL basis, you want to be brainstorming offerings that make sense in that location and context. And this is what avoids the ocean boiling that I mentioned earlier is you're not saying, well, we've got a YouTube channel and this, that, and the other, and we've got these 50 white papers and blah, 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 and then we've got these 10,000 URLs. What do we do? It's on this one URL, one by one, what should we do or what could we do? And so that's when you're going to brainstorm appropriate offers. And I would definitely, and I'll get to this in a moment, favor offers that you already have and can fulfill because that's going to be the least expensive. But if you have a really killer idea for something you could do, a self-assessment or whatever that the audience would value, that can be on the table too. You're just brainstorming, what can I offer this visitor in this context that is likely to result in something I'm trying to do, like de-anonymizing them or getting trials or what have you. Then you're going to want to design one or more actual calls to action per location. There will be varied opinions out there on whether you should just stick to one call to action per location or whether you might have two or more. I don't have strong opinions on this. I think it's pretty context dependent, but one thing to bear in mind as you think about calls to action is the more of them you have, the more diluted they are in the searcher or visitor's mind. That's the reason that squeeze pages were all the rage 10 years ago is like you only give one option for exiting this page. So it's all hyper focused on like, take this action. I don't recommend creating squeeze pages. I never would have recommended that, but the theory is kind of sound. The fewer calls to action, the more impactful each one will be. So bear that in mind. And then once you've done this, once you've actually instrumented the calls to action, you're going to test and measure the pairings of CTAs and offers with the locations. So I'm going to get into more granularity on how you do this with some screenshots of how I do it. The first thing to think through here is I'm kind of calling this the CTA grid or like, there's four things basically that you can do. And these are things that you can do with respect to the CTA or the offer itself and the location that you're putting this in. And what I mean by this is I'll just go through them. The first thing I have here is the offer and location can both be new. So what this means is you could, in theory, decide that you want to create a brand new blog post. And on that brand new blog post, you want to call to action to a brand new white paper in order to capture somebody's email address. This is the priciest thing you can do because you're going to have to create each one of these new things, the URL, the content itself, and the white paper, or whatever you're creating offer wise. So it's very expensive, and the uncertainty is also very high compared to the other things you can do. If you have existing collateral, either as a blog post or as an offer, then you probably have at least some data or at least a hunch as to how well those things are doing. Here you have nothing but speculation. So this can be quite powerful, but it's also expensive and very uncertain. You can also think in terms of an existing offer with a new blog post. This is something that Hit Subscribe, for instance, does all the time for clients. So this is kind of, hey, we've got this white paper that really resonates with our audience. We've had people in sales mention that this is a great piece of sales collateral. We want to get more eyeballs on it. What you can then do is go hypothesize about what new URLs you could create that would bring traffic to this existing asset. I'm not going to spend too much time on this since this is really more about using existing content and not creating new content. But this is a relatively inexpensive option, and it's I call the risk or the uncertainty here more moderate. If you already have a good, solid lead magnet that does well in your sales pipeline, that's pretty blue chip. So really, the only risk here is like, are you bringing eyeballs with your new content, and is it worth the money? The opposite of this, so new and existing, this is you're going to create a new white paper. You've got some blog post that's driving a lot of traffic, but it's not doing anything for you in the funnel. So you don't think you have anything on hand that is going to make this a productive visit. So you decide to build something. This is a higher risk thing because you're going to, as you can see with my little like diner pricing thing here, you're going to be spending a little bit more money on this. The lower in the funnel, the more expensive the collateral. And you also don't know if that piece is going to work. Blog posts, top of the funnel assets and traffic are easier to reason about. You can just turn on ads and drive traffic there. Whether people are going to resonate with the white paper or not is more of an unknown. And this could be, I'm just using white paper as an example. It could be any offer. And then finally, existing. And existing is both the cheapest and it is the least amount of uncertainty. So for this reason, this is absolutely where I would start. It's the lowest hanging fruit. Now, with this in mind, what I would suggest doing is creating a CTA library. And this is a screenshot of one I've created for Hit Subscribe's website. What you've got in here, you're going to brainstorm all of the assets at your disposal. So right now on the live site, there is a book a discovery call link that I think is in the menu structure of our site, I believe. So that's something that exists. Hit Subscribe also has, well, actually two YouTube channels. So in theory, we could have a call to action for, follow the YouTube channel. I'm calling that possible in the status over here because we haven't decided to do it. There is a status we have in here called planned, which is yes, we're going to do this. But this is the gist. So you have the asset itself, you have its status. I would keep track of what type of asset we're talking about to make campaign planning easier. And then also I would associate this with some kind of marketing goal. So for instance, a book a discovery call is pretty obvious. You're trying to build sales pipeline. There's no other thing you would do with that. But something like go to the YouTube channel, this might be more along the lines of securing the next touch, meaning if this person's going to leave anyway, let's throw a Hail Mary and maybe they follow the YouTube channel and then we can show them content again. So basically, to roll this up, what you want to do is take an inventory of all of your existing CTAs and document them in this fashion. And if they have a URL, for instance, or sorry, I should call these offers here. I'm confusing terms. These are really going to be your offers. I would say it's a CTA library in that like you're taking the action of pairing the offers with the locations. But if there is an offer and that offer has a URL, you want to be able to track and find that in some fashion. And then I'm also instrumenting custom Google Analytics or Google tags for this so that I can report on the number of clicks that happen on this call to action. In this, you might also want to capture other fields in here. So if you're doing a lot of planning of assets, you might want to like have an estimation of their cost, either dollar value or like relatively speaking, cheap, moderate, expensive. The expected value, like you could capture anything else that's going to help you make decisions about what to commission. The next thing you're going to do, because really this is an exercise in taking an inventory of two different things and then pairing them, you want to create the inventory of your URLs. And what I've got here is a Looker Studio example. If anyone's interested, I have these up as well. I could show in the browser, but this is a view of organic traffic to URLs on the Hit Subscribe site. And I think this is a pretty decent starting place because the proof is in the pudding here, so to speak. This is a sorted list of URLs in terms of traffic they're earning. So it is a good way to prioritize what you might do as a call to action. Um, if you have plans to do things like promote the URLs or refresh them or something, you can modify this to be kind of like total expected traffic or something. I don't know that I would go too far down the rabbit hole because the goal is to like do the pairing, not get lost in analysis. But generally speaking, what you really want here is the URLs basically sorted by how many eyeballs you think will be on them. Now, the other thing that I would do is you don't just want to go into this blindly and pair things. You would want to call any inappropriate contexts. And as an example here, somewhere there is a hit subscribe, apply to be an author. That's a heavily trafficked page. Now, the fact that a lot of people see that page doesn't mean that there's a good call to action for hit subscribe on that page necessarily. And the reason for that is the people who are looking to write blog posts for hit subscribe are not the same people that are going to be looking to commission content fulfillment or SEO strategy or things of that nature. So you're going, I mean, like a good example of this would be if for some reason your like cookie and privacy terms page gets a lot of views, you probably don't want to instrument that with calls to action. It's just not relevant. So you're going to call that out, and what's remaining is this sorted priority list of the URLs that you want to plan calls to action for. Now, this is a view where I'm going through. So I did a hypothetical screenshot of this. This is what it would look like as we were going through the mapping exercise. So what you want to do first and foremost is if you've got a URL and it has a current call to action, you want to capture that and capture it under current calls to action so you know what you're working with. The next thing that I would recommend doing is you want to potential CTAs here. Anything that strikes you as context appropriate that you might do, you might as well throw in here. So we have a blog post that I assume from the slug was about the return on investment of blogging and what might be relevant. Maybe the last webinar we did about content KPIs, maybe this webinar about moving people down the funnel. Like I could see that being relevant. So we're trying to err on the side of brainstorming and capturing possible calls to action for that URL. You're going to review this with any stakeholders. So if you're just doing this all solo, that's just going to be you. But if there are more people involved in this, you're probably going to want to get buy-in and agreement from everybody that's involved. If you're going to do that, you might create another column here like candidate CTAs. So here are all the ones we possibly could do, but here's the ones that I, the person spearheading this, suggest. And then you would get buy-in and approval from the people you need it from. And from there, you're going to go ahead and make an implementation plan. So you're going to walk through all this and eventually agree on the CTAs to put on each of these URLs. Now you just need to implement those on the page themselves. So when it comes to these pairings, how should you think of this? So here are some questions that I would be asking myself in the process of this brainstorming. So first, what is the intent of the context? Like, what is this person doing? And a good example of matching intent of the context would be, we have a content KPI webinar that we're doing right now. This is all very meta. Oh wait, no, that was last webinar, content KPIs. Anyway, a content KPI webinar recording, if I had written some blog post about KPIs, this is an entirely appropriate matching of the intent. So the person is there to read about content KPIs. Inviting them to consume a webinar about content KPIs absolutely fits with what they're trying to do. On the other hand, somewhere on our site from 7 or 8 years ago, there's a blog post about blog post conclusions. If they're reading about how to conclude a blog post and you throw in a, hey, come buy 6 figures worth of content, that makes absolutely no sense. So you don't want to mismatch the intent. Another question to ask is like, do we know how segmented these visitors are? So for instance, if we created some piece of content that would interest only somebody with a title like head of content or director of content, then we know that's a very tight segmentation. So for that person, if the thing that we're talking about is like struggling to fulfill content or something, booking a sales call with us would actually make a fair bit of sense. If, on the other hand, I say ditto here, if we were to like do a book a sales call in the blog post about blog post conclusions. The segmentation is terrible. Who's going to read about blog post conclusions? I mean, literally anybody that's writing a blog post. So we are speaking to such a broad audience that the call to action doesn't make any real sense there. You also want to be thinking about your goals. So, for instance, if you're really trying to focus on de-anonymizing people and getting more leads to reach out to, building a mailing list, something like that, then you would probably think in terms of like a gated offer or a gated asset. If, on the other hand, you had just commissioned a solution brief or an analyst write up or something of that nature, and you wanted as many people to see that as possible, you don't want to gate that. You just want to show it to them and bank on like subsequent touches. Is the escalation logical? So if you are showcasing how to do something cool with your offering and the offering is a relatively low entry price point and the person can sign up, then yeah, book a demo makes sense, or start a trial makes sense. That's a natural escalation. They're already trying to figure out how to use your offer to do something. They might as well sign up for it. It is a pretty unnatural escalation if you're publishing some PR that you have raised around a funding to then say like, hey, while you're here, book a sales call. Like that's a weird escalation. So you don't want to do things like that. And then the last thing I would ask is, can we find something logical? So think outside the box a little bit. And I'm going to get to this more towards the end here with like misconceptions, but take the author, apply to be an author page. So on Hit Subscribe site, I know that gets a lot of traffic, but not really from our buyers. But maybe we could do something there like link to our rev share, which is something that we do if people make warm referrals. We'll do a rev share with that refer. So if that's on the table, that might be something to mention to offer authors or prospective authors to enlist them as part of our marketing apparatus. So you could get creative and say like, look, I got a lot of traffic here anyway, so we might as well do something with it. And on the other side of that, I wouldn't recommend abandoning some blog post that's bringing you 5 or 10,000 visitors a month or something like that simply because it's like the wrong intent or something. I would recommend figuring out something to do with that because buried in that noise is probably a little signal that you could reach out to. So implementing here, this is just some tips and like I'm not going to dive into like how to do everything on your site and all CMSs, but a few pieces of guidance as you actually implement the CTAs that you've mapped. First and foremost, I would suggest for the assets and the calls to action that you work with your graphics folks if you have them to make something that is more than just a simple text call to action and that is visually appealing. I would recommend something like vertical in nature, typically that draws the eye inside of a piece of content without distracting. Don't spam people with modal pop-ups and things like that. But you do want something that stands out and isn't necessarily confused with just the blog post. So you want to work on developing things like that that attract the eye. I wouldn't spend an outrageous amount of time on it because you want to see if they work first. You're going to get some data about what works and doesn't, but I would make it more than just text. And once you've done that, the way you actually want to instrument this, I have an example in WordPress here with this concept of shortcode. And this is like a placeholder to have the WordPress plugin add a bunch more stuff to the post. And the reason that you want to do this is the problem it solves is imagine that you land on a call to action and it's going to be like a graphic wrapped around a link or something like that. Now, the next thing you do is you go and you add this to 50 different pieces of content. Well, what happens if you make a typo or you want to change something? Now you're going to have to go correct it in 50 different places. You don't want to do that. Only pain is down that road. So you want to be able to edit these things in one place, and shortcodes are a great way to do that. It's going to make your life easier in general for maintenance, and it's going to bring A/B testing down from a prohibitive place. Next, here's a recommendation that I have that's a little more nuanced, but I think is important. I would recommend instrumenting. I mean, assuming you're using Google Analytics, whatever your tool is, you want to instrument measurement of clicks of the CTA. So I've got a blog post. It's like, click here to check out the webinar. That's my offer, my call to action. I want to be able to measure how many people click that. Now, the distinction I'm drawing here is that in your marketing automation, it's pretty likely that you'll have something like sign up for our mailing list or what have you. They're going to click, it's going to take, or, book a demo with HubSpot or whatever. They're going to click, it's going to take you to some other URL where you're going to fill out a form. You're going to click again. And what you're actually going to be measuring with this CTA is how many people make it through that whole process and are on your mailing list or whatever. The problem there is you are going to lose people along the way in those steps. And unless you're measuring the first click and then the back end value, you're not going to know how many people fall off during that process. That is important, critically important, because knowing that distinction tells you whether there's something wrong with your sign up for the mailing list form, like it's broken, or it's just onerous and people drop off, or whether there's something wrong with your call to action. If you don't have that granularity, you won't really know which. So I would strongly suggest instrumenting your analytics with a custom event or your Google Tag Manager with a custom event, and then reporting on it so that you can actually see at the closest point how many people are clicking this call to action. So defining and evaluating success once you've implemented and mapped, um, is the location or context worthwhile? So is it worth having stuff on this blog post or this URL or whatever? So here, try various CTAs. If the first one works, great. If not, try different CTAs, see if you can get a productive visit here, even if it's just like a next touch. So that will tell you if you can do something worthwhile with the location itself. Is the CTA effective? Circling back to earlier, does the click through beat the hypothesized value? Does it beat other different CTAs in an A/B test? Is it producing enough clicks to meet your goal or to earn return? That's how I would be thinking about the call to action on the page itself. And then finally, is the asset effective? Is a whole different can of worms that I won't get into too much here. But this is basically like once they've signed up for your mailing list or read your solution brief or whatever, are they doing whatever it is you want them to do? Now, this isn't germane to this discussion, but it's crucially important because if you do everything right and you get them onto an asset that, goes over like a lead balloon, then it's all for naught. So you definitely need to know this. So culling winners and losers, or culling losers and doubling down on winners. Here are some scenarios that might come up once you actually start bringing in data and you're thinking about these things. Number one, if the CTA produces no clicks, I can't stress this enough. Wait for a month or something. You want to get like 1,000 impressions or something like that on it before you start drawing this conclusion. Because if you think about it, even a decent call to action and conversion rate might be in the neighborhood of 1%. That means you would need 100 visits before you could even expect a single click. And it's going to be a lot more than that before you can conclude like this doesn't seem to be working. So patience first and foremost. Or if you're not patient, you could just drive a fire hose of traffic to it with ads or something like that. But assuming you've waited long enough and the CTA is producing no clicks, first thing to try, maybe you tweak the CTA, do different things with it, and give it another run of time and see if that produces clicks. You could also try a different asset or CTA in there and run some A/B testing. So if the thing is producing no clicks, but you introduced item B and it does, then there was something wrong with the offer CTA for item A. If the CTA is underperforming, so it's getting some clicks, it's, the thing is working. It's not like a measurement issue, but it's underperforming. First and foremost, try tweaking it and seeing if that improves the uptake. And then again, you can, if that doesn't, try a different asset. If the CTA is only performing well in some places, this is kind of more interesting. So you instrument a CTA broadly, like book a demo, and you find that on some posts it's gangbusters and on others it's just nothing. Now it's time to start looking at that and seeing what patterns you can identify. So, like, where is this working? And you can form hypotheses about why it's working. And then you're going to validate that hypothesis. So, if, for instance, you're saying, well, it looks like the book a demo really works in all of our tutorial posts and nowhere else, then what you're going to want to do is maybe create or instrument some new tutorial posts and also a control of new non-tutorial posts to validate this hypothesis. So my hypothesis is when I do this, it should also work in this group and it should also not work in this other control group. And then if that's true, you're really onto something. And so you can apply the same logic to the CTA performing well. Once you've identified these patterns and you start to be able to reason effectively about what works and where, you're going to have, this is a good problem to have now, things get easy. So if the CTA performs well, bring more people to that location to have it in front of them. If the CTA performs well, you also want to find similar locations and contexts and do more of it. If you run out of those, start creating new locations and contexts that are similar to the ones that do well, and then also create similar assets and see if those do well. So you're really looking to iterate your way towards that success, and once you have it, do as much of it as possible. Lastly, here I got a couple of things, misconceptions I see, and then takeaways. So one thing I hear a lot is like this page is too low intent. I talked about this before. Sure, not every page on your site, especially if you have some traffic that's never really done much of anything for you. It's not going to necessarily result in pipeline immediately, but you can probably do something useful with that page, unless you've just really gone off the rails in talking about something utterly irrelevant to your offering. You can probably brainstorm something to do there, even if it's just getting them to come back or, go to your YouTube channel or something. Having somebody subscribe to you in some medium or connected with you in some fashion is better than whatever state they started in. So use that traffic that you think is too low intent to do something productive. We don't want the wrong people on the site is something I hear a lot. And I understand this from a ROI perspective that if you're going to create content in a vacuum, you don't want to create content where only 10% of the people are segmented to your audience and the rest you don't care about. That's not great. But I think that people get too focused on that because let's say you're creating that non-segmented DevOps post or whatever. The fact that a lot of people on your site aren't your intended buyers doesn't mean that your intended buyers aren't on your site. So, number one, there is going to be some signal in that noise. But number two, you could probably engineer a hand raise. So, if you're trying to reach specifically CISOs on your What is DevOps post, you could always instrument some call to action quite simply at the bottom that says, hey, if you're a CISO reading this, you should check out X. Now, if anyone takes that call to action, not only are they doing something that you would consider a productive visit? They've just identified their persona. So that's a hand raise that's actually pretty powerful. So you can usually kind of make the most out of these things. Uh, I've heard a lot that, this asset doesn't work. Maybe, but it might just be the call to action itself or the other components of this that are the problem. Maybe you're putting it in the wrong place, showing it to the wrong people, etc. So before you conclude that an asset doesn't work, you would really want to ascertain that the people you intend to read the asset are actually reading the asset and they don't like it. Similarly, like this CTA doesn't work, like, yeah, maybe, or it may be that you're just not getting traffic and there's nobody around to take up the CTA. It may be that the value proposition there isn't good. It could be a whole host of things, but a lot of times it's easy to come to these conclusions based on data because putting up a CTA and seeing zero for weeks is disheartening. So it's easy to say, yeah, this doesn't work, when in reality, you might have a much more specific problem. So, important takeaways here for this. Maximizing your CTAs is mainly grunt work and organizing and not flashy assets. So certainly creating good ideas and self-assessments and all these fun things is an important part of the process. But really here to drive important business outcomes, it's really just about rolling up your sleeves, sitting down and mapping these things out and forming a plan. And if you have 1,000 URLs on your site and 20 different possible offers, that's a lot of work. You can almost always make existing traffic useful. I won't belabor that point anymore since I was just talking about this. I mean, this sounds maybe like a flex for a business that has done content for a lot of years, but traffic is easy. If you want traffic on your site, that is not a hard problem to solve. It's just the right combination of planning and effort and sometimes ad money. But the value props are not easy. So what I'm getting at here is you want to find end-to-end success. So instead of saying like, let's build a 500,000 visitors a month to the site and then we'll figure it out. I mean, if you are pretty confident in your ability later to figure it out, God bless. But if you're not, I would say first do end-to-end success. Get some people onto some pieces of content, get them converting and doing everything you want them to do. Once you have that, the traffic piece is comparably easy. It's the value props and the assets that are harder. You're almost certainly underusing your existing assets. This I see all the time. We'll go on look at a sites like resource pages or whatever, and they've got some cool assets. They got a write up from Gartner, whatever the case may be, and that's appearing on 0 pages on their website. You're doing nothing wrong if that's the case. Life is busy. That's not going to be the first and foremost thing there. My point is, you almost certainly already have valuable stuff at your disposal. And part and parcel with that is you're almost certainly underusing your existing traffic. Um, you can learn a lot about your audience and buyers from how they react to your CTAs. So there is kind of a product and positioning component to this as well. You're not just doing marketing things if they like CTA one and not CTA two, or they like asset one and not asset two. You can learn things about the buyers themselves and what they value and prioritize that you might even feed back into product discussions. You can find appropriate CTAs for a wide range of contexts. So this is another one. If you just sit down and you think about a URL, like the way I did with our applied authors page, it isn't actually that hard to brainstorm potentially useful calls to action that are a little less on your radar at the beginning. And finally, you can have productive visits anywhere in your journey or funnel. So it's obviously a productive visit. Somebody books a call and then gives you money. But it can be a productive visit in a very top of the funnel post when you're planting the seed and that person's going to revisit your site for a long time. So as you look at your assets, as you do this mapping exercise, you want to be thinking about the whole spectrum of productive things that could be happen, not just pipeline. And I believe that is it. So I've got my cat guy here asking if anybody has any questions. I don't see any hand raises, but I don't think this is like the state of the business, so I don't know if I would.
Yeah, I'm not
There's
seeing
no,
any
there's no
questions.
questions.
All right, well, that's easy enough. I appreciate everybody who joined and also any of you folks that are watching later and or reading the transcript. And yeah, we'll catch you next time.